Hey everyone, it's the Caveman here. I wanted to do a video on one of my favorite sounds I made recently. I figured out a way to make a pretty similar Neuro-like sound. For those who don't know, neuro-based sounds generally start with something pretty simple like a sine wave, and through constant resampling with parallel filters and distortion and saturation, you can create these really crazy movements. Sometimes they're vocal, sometimes they're super crisp. But it's this constant change that you can get with all these filters moving and constantly resampling and distorting a little more and adding more filters, and namely parallel filters, so filters stacked on top of each other that are doing different things. But that gets really complex and takes a lot of time to constantly make your own neural bases, which I do recommend if you're interested in those sounds. It's a lot of fun to make them. But I wanted to try making something similar that you could do with one patch and one filter. So I came up with this sound here. I do have some filter automation happening here. We'll go over that later, which is changing the timbre a little bit. Now this compared to a actual neural-based sound is pretty simple. It's not neural-based, generally speaking. If you have like an 8-bar loop that you've spent the time resampling and really making intricate, each little part of the sample is going to sound pretty different. And here the sound is obviously the same, like every time a note is played, it's very relatively the same sound. It just slightly changes in timbre or frequency level. But I was looking more for a simplified version of that to get that same kind of aggressive, growly feeling from neuro-bass into one patch. Now, to put it into context, I have a track here that I've been working on recently that has this sound in it. You can see it's a really good driving force in a track. That rip and tear feel I really enjoy. Let's dive into how I made this. Now, generally I like to do my tutorial videos from scratch, show you each step. The thing about this sound is it's super finicky when it comes to the slopes and the envelopes, the trigger modes. A lot of things can affect this sound and you don't get that same type of quality that I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do in this video is kind of break down what I have. And then I'm also going to attach the Serum file as well as the Ableton rack with my OTT and limiter. It's really nothing crazy. I wanted to keep it simple in terms of processing. I wanted you to be able to do this all within Serum. The only difference really between the process and not process is some volume, catching those peaks, and the OTT just gives it some more bite. We get a little bit of the squelch in there, even with the time set all the way up. But in terms of the mix, you don't really hear that come through. So what I have going on here is a few things I want to talk about. I obviously have oscillator A and B on, but oscillator B, I have the third harmonic just playing. So this note's actually an F, and here's the first harmonic. But what I'm doing is removing all the harmonics in this sound and bringing in just the third harmonic. What this is going to do is going to give me a different sound when we're FMing. I also have it up an octave, so if we listen to it down an octave, right, it doesn't have that neural quality anymore. And if we listen to it, you know, let's say with just the fundamentals, so just the sine wave. Now, it's a nice dark sound. I don't dislike that. But for the sound that I'm going for, the third harmonic really helps. You get a much nicer type of FM through it. So we have the oscillator B set to the third harmonic. We have the oscillator up an octave. And in oscillator A, we just have the analog sine with some FM. We have envelope 2 modulating it. And we have some pretty exact numbers here. And I'll show you how things kind of change if we change some of these in a second. But basically, attack we want at 205 milliseconds, 0 hold, decay 407 milliseconds, no sustain, no release. You want a pretty straight slope coming up and then a slight exponential drop on the way down. So if we start to play with some of these settings, right, obviously because it's controlling the FM's a pretty big part of what makes the sound. But it's not only that. We start playing with the slopes as well. you get a lot of different sounds that are happening, and that's great. I mean, you can play with that and save them as different ones. Now for the volume modulation, we're going to go 307 on the attack, 70 milliseconds on the hold, 1 second exactly on the decay. There's no sustain, and 70 milliseconds on the release. Now, the release shouldn't matter too much because the sustain is down. But if we test it, it does make a difference, right? So we're going to go 70 on the release. And a slightly outward slope on the up and a slight exponential slope on the way down. Now, one thing that's also really big in this sound is the filter. And the filter is being controlled by the envelope 3 and envelope 2. But we'll come back to that in a second. I'm using a multi-filter within Serum. This filter, Ableton also has, it gives us this morph knob. And if I bring the cutoff up here and play with the morph, we morph from a low pass to a band pass to a high pass. So this is going to kind of mimic the type of filter movements that we have going in Nero Bass. And it's going to give us that control or that movement in the highs and the lows constantly coming in and out, which is what happens in Nero Basses. Envelope 3, we're going to have a setting of 71 milliseconds on the attack, pretty straight slope, 875 milliseconds decay, 0 hold, 0 sustain, 290 milliseconds release, with a pretty exponential drop on the way down. And this is going to control the cutoff. So we're going to have the cutoff set all the way down on the filter and then bring that up to about 54. If we look at the matrix, we got the envelope 2 controlling the warp at a value of 36, envelope 2 controlling the filter vary, which is the morph, at 100%. We got envelope 3 controlling the filter cutoff at value of 54. And then we have LFO 3 controlling the wavetable position. So if we take a look at that, we got LFO 3 controlling the wavetable position of this, just again to give it some movement. Doesn't change the sound too much, but just enough. One thing you want to make sure you do is have the LFO set to envelope or trigger. Don't have it on off, because if you have it on off, you don't get that consistent aggression, and you get a little bit more of a resonant sound. Speaking of resonance, your resonance on the filter should be about 18, 19, and the drive on the filter should be 32%. I have mono and legato on, and also always portamento, with the portamento at around 182 milliseconds. That you can play around with as well. Now, lastly, what we have here is a multiband compressor. We got the threshold set to negative 26.6. The ratio set to 32:1, the attack set to 0.3 milliseconds, the release at the highest it'll go, which is 999.1 milliseconds, the gain at about 19. And then these, again, you can do these to taste depending on how much highs you want, but if you're trying to make something similar, we're going to go 149 on the highs, 149%, 125% on the mids, and 136% on the lows. Now, again, if we start playing with some of these, right, that movement is still pretty similar, but we lose a lot of like what the sound is and what makes that sound that sound. I mean, that's pretty cool on its own, but it's not really going to give us the sound we want. So I've gone and reset it back to all the original settings. And that's pretty much it. If we had no filter movements going on here, no automation, right? It's more stagnant than it needs to be. But if we play with the filter cutoff, we get a different sound where we kind of lose that aggression, but now we kind of add some more sparkly highs and kind of tame the lows a bit. So when you move between these two, you can change the tone of it, and it just gives it more of an interesting timbre over time. And so that's why I just had this basic. Now, one thing that really does make this sound shine is moving from an octave above to the octave below. So we're playing the F down here in the F sharp, but when we jump up to the F1, you get that really nice neural bass movement, right? Neural bass also has some pitch movement in it too, oftentimes. And by doing that, you really get a nice pull into it, or that kind of growly feel, that vocally feel. And that's really one of my favorite parts of this sound. Anyways, I hope this helped you guys out. But check out the free download in the description below. If this content helped you at all, please like, subscribe, let your friends know. It helps me continue to do what I love to do. Thank you. I'll see you on the next one.